Good morning, viewers. Good morning if you're watching this on the replay or whether you're joining me here live today. My name is Randy Lyman. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold today, so I'm a little bit congested. My name is Randy Lyman. I am the pet uncle. Welcome to Memorial Day edition of WAG of the Tale. Thank you for any hearts, for any sharing that you do on today's show. Please put your say hello in the comments so we can all see who's here, and I'll be able to speak with you during the course of today's show. Again, I appreciate whatever hearts, whatever comments, whatever shares you can do on today's show. You are watching WAG of the Tale. It is my weekly variety magazine show about pets and animals and the difference that we make in each other's lives, that humans and animals make in each other's lives. Good morning, good to see you. Today being Memorial Day, we are going to make today a bit of a salute to all the animals who have served army in the military throughout human history. Animals, as you can see in the note above today's video, animals have served in the military since the beginning of warfare, since humans first started going to war. Dogs in particular have shown a great deal of heroism on the battlefield, but they are far from the only animal that has ever served. Good morning, Monique. Good to see you. In fact, animals have, unlike humans, however, animals have never signed up. Animals have never volunteered to be in the military, and yet they have often served with distinction and given their lives for king and country, and along with human soldiers. So, and they have been used on land, sea, and air. All land animals, sea animals, and flying animals as well have all been used. So today on Wag of the Tale, we're going to take a little, it's going to be not a very long show today, but I didn't want to let the day pass without saluting all the animals who have served throughout military history. You may have heard of Rin Tin Tin, a German Shepherd who was a movie star, actually quite a big movie star during the 1920s. He was apparently in his day as good of an actor as anyone else on the screen. He was quite expressive and really had some personality and was quite a famous star. Rin Tin Tin was actually rescued from a World War I battlefield by an American soldier named Lee Duncan, who actually named him Rinty, R-I-N-T-Y, and he became known as Rin Tin Tin. But who knows what service Rin Tin Tin actually saw on the field of battle? We don't know. He was only rescued afterwards. But animals and dogs, as I've said, have often served throughout the yes, the 1920s, almost 100 years ago. Actually, yes, I know. It seems like it was just yesterday, huh? This year, right now, actually, voting is going on in recognition of the heroic service that dogs often perform in the military and elsewhere. The American Humane Association is actually, voting is going on right now for its annual Hero Dog Awards. There, you can vote through, I think, June 22nd in 8 different categories, one of which is dogs in the military. And that's always broadcast on the Hallmark Channel. But canine heroism is recognized pretty universally. And in fact, this is war memorials to dogs actually abound throughout the country and throughout the world. This is a famous war dog memorial from the Marines on the island of Guam. 25 Marine dogs gave their lives liberating the island of Guam during World War II in 1944. And according to the inscription on the memorial, they served, and this will just give you a little hint of the kind of things that dogs and other animals have been used for throughout the history of war. These dogs served as sentries, they served as messengers and scouts, they explored caves, they detected mines and booby traps. You can imagine that was, not all of them survived that. And so this memorial was erected in Guam. There are war dog memorials just throughout the country and throughout the world. And here, as a picture, here's a dog at war. It's a little hard to see the wire, but this is one of the ways in which dogs were used. Dog is laying telephone wire for communications. It is only a pretty recent phenomenon since really the 1970s that dogs and other animals have been really recognized and sort of accorded the rights and respect that we tend to do now. They were just animals, right? So it didn't matter if they were useful, and so they were used. People just simply did not look at dogs and other animals the way that we look at them today. And so they were used to lay telephone wire, and often animals and dogs as well. It was their keen sense of smell that would enable them to detect mines and other things that humans could not detect. But most of the animals and many of the uses for dogs were what we would consider quite cruel today. During World War II, the Soviet Union used dogs as anti-tank weapons. They would strap bombs onto the backs of the dogs and throw food under advancing tanks so that the dogs would run underneath the tanks. They would detonate the bombs and blow up the enemy tanks. This was understandably, a lot of dogs refused to dive under moving tanks. They were not stupid. And also many of them were scared away by gunfire. But this is just sort of very typical of the kind of ways that dogs and other animals have been used. There are some, quite often animals have been used to either detect or to set off or explode mines and bombs. But dogs have not been, quite far and away, not the only animals that have been used and abused during war. The horse is actually the most widely used animal throughout the history of warfare. They could pull chariots, they could carry light armor, and once the stirrup and the saddle were invented, the horse-mounted cavalry became a staple, became one of the highest prestige, sort of the most prestigious combat arm in European armies for many centuries. The Charge of the Light Brigade, for example, during the Crimean War, famous poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson, written by about the Light Brigade charging into the Crimea, where the poem says 600, it was actually 673, and it was an absolute slaughter of both men and animals. Related to the horse, mules have often been used in war as pack animals. They were able to carry very heavy loads. They're very cautious and very hardy animals. They could carry supplies where jeeps and pack horses could not travel. And here you can see a mule carrying a recoilless gun during World War II. Besides dogs, horses, and mules, another staple of the military, not really in this country, but in Asia, the elephant has been used for thousands of years. Actually, the first recorded use from Sanskrit hymns shows that elephants were used for military purposes as long ago as 1100 BC, so more than 3,000 years ago. And of course, one of the most famous uses of elephants in warfare was during the Second Punic War, when Hannibal famously crossed the Alps to invade Rome from the north. I forget how many animals, and of course many of them died. They could not survive the cold weather. But the invasion, Hannibal's invasion of Rome from the north using elephants is certainly, for those who are into military history, certainly a landmark use of animals in warfare. In more arid climates, camels have often been used in much the same way as horses and mules for carrying things, for carrying loads, for carrying munitions, for carrying small weapons like this. In desert climates, of course, camels can survive that desert climate much better than horses and other pack animals, because they carry their water in their humps and were able to make the desert journey. And then another very large animal often used to pull things and carry things, a little hard to see in the picture, but oxen were used to to pull cannons, to carry loads, especially during World War I. I think that's when this photo dates from, is World War I. You can see the oxen and you can see the large, the cannons that they're pulling behind. So these large land animals have often been used before the invention of jeeps and tanks and motorized vehicles. It was large animals that were used to transport armies and to transport weapons and other materials for waging war throughout Europe, throughout Asia, throughout Africa, throughout much of the world, and in the United States too. Of course, you know, in the Civil War we had the cavalry, where horses were used as well. But it is not just land animals that have been used in warfare. Sea animals as well. Most famously, dolphins and sea lions have been used by the Navy for sentry duty, for mine clearance, for detecting mines, for recovering objects, for cuffing enemy swimmers who have been coming on. Seals could sneak, a sea lion could sneak right up to an underwater swimmer, attach a cuff to their leg, which would then be used to haul the invader up to the surface. And here you can see a dolphin flying out of the water with a camera attached to his flipper. So they've been used, sea animals as well. I have a picture of a whale here. Whales themselves have not necessarily been used in warfare, but there's a very interesting story that I learned some years ago. In the 1950s, the U.S. Navy had a very extensive program of recording the sounds of underwater animals, something that whales, dolphins, crab, shrimp, all kinds of things. They had a very large recording of animal sounds because they thought, just in case Soviet submarines were going to disguise themselves by emitting animal sounds, the U.S. Navy wanted to have a recording of these animal sounds so they could detect Soviet subs that were trying to imitate these sea animals in order to not get caught. Now, to my knowledge, there was never any instance of Soviet submarines actually emitting sounds of sea animals. But a guy I know named or met one time back in the 1980s, who I have talked about on this show before, a man named Bernie Krause, who is one of the foremost nature sound recording artists. He recorded many of the gorilla sounds that were used in what was the movie about Diane Fossey? Gorillas in the Mist. He is well known for many years of recording nature sounds. He has recordings of whales, and he came across, I had met him in the mid-1980s, shortly after he discovered this. He found this collection of Navy recordings of sea animals, and he sampled the sounds of, I swear I even heard this. I looked for a recording and I couldn't find it. He sampled the sounds of whales and turtles and crabs and shrimp, and he sampled them into a song using, like, some animals as the hi-hat and some as the bass and some as the guitar. And he released a CD called Fish Rap, R-A-P, Fish Rap, that he basically sampled and created a rap song using the sounds of these sea animals recorded by the U.S. Navy in the 1950s. And I am still trying to track down a recording of this. I will continue to look for it, and believe me, if I ever find it, I will certainly play it on this show and on Periscope. But so whales themselves were never used in warfare. Yes, fish rap. Yes, and actually he did a really good job of it. I wish I had that recording. It was from, when did I have this? It was in 1987 or 1988, something like that was when I met the guy. This man, Bernie Krause, his whale recordings were what was used to get Humphrey the whale out of San Francisco Bay back in the 1980s. I've talked about that on this show as well. He had in his collection the sound of whales feeding, and they stuck that played that recording off of a boat, and they stuck it in the water and got Humphrey to follow the sound of the whales feeding back out into the ocean. So yes, fish rap. I will certainly continue to look for this and definitely play it, because it was quite a piece of work. But that was another way that animals were not so much used. They were recorded as a way of sort of finding out if Soviet submarines were imitating them. So not just land and sea, but also by the air. Of course, pigeons were used not just as messengers during the First World War, but for photography. As you can see in this illustration, they would strap cameras to the front of the pigeons and take and use them for aerial photography before airplanes were used for that. It was not particularly successful, but they tried. And of course, homing pigeons have been used since medieval times for carrying messages. In World War II, there were also experiments performed using pigeons to guide guided missiles. Pigeons have replaced me? No, I assure you, pigeons have not replaced you. Far, far from it. To my knowledge, they're not used for this anymore. Now we have drones. You've been replaced by drones, Monique, not by pigeons. But in World War II, the Army had a project called Project Pigeon that they tried to get pigeons to guide guided missiles. They would place the pigeons inside the missile so that they could see outside a window, and they were trained to peck at controls to guide the missile left or right depending on the target shape that they were aimed for. And of course, naturally, the pigeons were not expected to survive this mission. I don't know if the pigeons fired the shutter or not, but they were certainly used to guide the guided missiles because they could do that. But crazy use of warfare, of pigeons in warfare, not really successful, but you know, the sort of human ingenuity in thinking of ways to use animals in war. And you know, if it weren't so harmful and deadly to the animals, it would be sort of ingenious and clever, which I suppose it is if you look at it that way. But this, like I said, this program was not particularly successful. Another bird that was used in warfare, or attempted to be used in warfare, chickens. During the Gulf War, chickens were used to detect poisonous gases in an operation called, I'm not making this up, Kuwaiti Field Chicken, or KFC. The official designation for a chicken in the U.S. Marines was a poultry chemical confirmation device. That was the official military name for a chicken that they tried to get to go into detect poison gases during the Gulf War. The plan was put on hold, and as far as I know, never actually put into effect because, the names are kind of funny, but the fact is that this plan was never put into effect because 41 out of the 43 chickens that they shipped to Kuwait died within a week of arrival, and so they were never able to put the plan into effect. But chickens have in fact been used in warfare as recently as the Gulf War. Another flying animal, not a bird, but a bee. Bees have been used for sniffing bombs because apparently you can train a bee to recognize the smell of certain bomb ingredients, and then because bees use their dances and their movements and the movements of their tail to indicate the presence to other bees of certain foods, of nectars and whatever, if enough bees did such a thing in unison at the scent of a bomb ingredient, then that was how they would be able to tell where the bombs were. And before that, a much more sort of primitive and barbaric use of bees in warfare was throughout the Middle Ages. Bees were an important part of siege tactics. Not the bees well, yes, the bees, but not one at a time. Entire beehives were launched from catapults over the city walls of the city being besieged to spread terror within the city. So that was just another way that bees. Who knows, what happened to the bees in there? I'm sure many flew away. But beehives were used to inspire terror during medieval warfare, during sieges. Another particularly, I suppose, sort of clever, but at the same time very cruel use of flying animals, bats, have been used to carry small bombs. And because bats sleep during the day, yes, bee catapults. I know, who would have... this was in medieval times. They did what they could. They were just bees that stung to them at that time. Bats have been used to carry bombs because bats sleep during the day inside. Small explosives were strapped to bats who would then fly into the enemy building, and while they were sleeping during the day would then blow up inside the building. And in fact, not just bats, but dogs, horses, other animals have often been used to carry bombs by terrorists, by insurgents, by armies. Bombs were simply strapped to the animals, who were then just left to wander around. And then once they got close to enemy territory, the bombs were just detonated from a distance. Excuse me, I'm a little bit congested today and not feeling that well, so excuse my delivery here. Other just sort of animals that you would never expect to be used in warfare, but often have been. Gerbils have been used to fight terrorism. Actually, they weren't really used. They were, at least not extensively. Israeli army had the idea of placing gerbils in cage at airport checkpoints, so that they would detect the scent of they could detect the scent of high levels of adrenaline, which purported they assumed that terrorists about to get onto a plane with a bomb would have high levels of adrenaline in their system, and the gerbils would be used to detect that. However, the plan was abandoned because the gerbils could not distinguish between terrorists and people who were simply afraid of flying and just had high levels of adrenaline in their system. So some gerbils got saved in that program was never put into effect. Rats, giant rats, have often been used as mine detectors because of their sense of smell, and also their small size prevented them from enabled them to avoid triggering the mine. So they could detect mines but not actually trigger them because they were small. Insects have been used in warfare. Glowworms were used in World War I to light trenches when there was no other way of lighting the trenches. And other insects, unbelievably, have been used as cyborgs, implanted with miniature microphones and electronic controls, so that they could sneak into conference rooms and record the going-ons that were in there. And so yes, insects too. And finally, one species that has been sort of conspicuously absent from my survey of military animals here, and that, of course, is cats. Cats have been particularly unsuitable in use for warfare, but there was one attempt to use cats during the Cold War, and I'm going to just tell you, this is something that the CIA did. This is one of those stories that is just so science fiction and so farcical and so horrific all at the same time that it could only be true. And just to skip ahead, the plan was eventually abandoned. During the Cold War, the CIA attempted to turn an ordinary domestic cat into a bugging device as part of an operation they called Operation Acoustic Kitty. The idea was to surgically alter the cat so that they could eavesdrop on Soviet conversations from park benches and windowsills. What they did, the project began in 1961. The CIA implanted a battery and a microphone into a cat and turned its tail into an antenna. However, the cat wandered off when it was hungry, which, of course, the CIA had to address. Bad idea. 5 surgeries later, and intensive training, and after $15 million of expense to train this cat, turn this cat into a walking radio transmitter, the cat was ready for its first field test. So they drove the cat to a Soviet compound in Washington, D.C. They let it out of a parked van that was across a street from the compound. The cat walked into the road and was immediately hit by a taxi and killed. So it never went anywhere after all that. The poor kitty died. $15 million, 5 surgeries later. The whole idea was declared a failure and abandoned in 1967. Just 6 years after it started. So that is the one and only instance I ever found of cats trying to be used in warfare during the Cold War. A dismal failure. So on this Memorial Day, I want to tip my hat and salute to this cat and all the other animals who have given their lives for their country. unlike humans, as I said in the notes, it was never voluntary. No cat ever, no dog, no horse ever signed up and enlisted to join. They've always been pressed into service by humans. And yet that is not to, and yet at the same time, just as we do with our human soldiers, we should honor the soldiers and honor what they did. And when I think of how, I guess what I wanted to say to sort of wrap up this whole episode of WAG of the Tale, the main thing that I thought was fitting was the words of Mother Jones, a labor and community organizer in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Mother Jones, who said famously, "Mourn for the dead, fight like hell for the living." And I think that I would like to end the show with that as the epitaph today for all the animals who have served throughout the history of human warfare. That we should mourn for all the animals who have given their lives and fight like hell for those who still are alive. So that's it for today's show. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all the comments and shares. I'm Randy Lyman, the Pet Uncle. I'm here every Monday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Central. I have replays and show notes of all my shows at WagOfTheTale.live and on Medium at the Pet Uncle. I'll be posting today's show a little later today. You can reach me at the Pet Uncle on Twitter and Periscope, my blog at thepetuncle.com, and you can email me at randy@thepetuncle.com. Again, excuse me for my congested delivery today, but that's it for today's show. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of your Memorial Day weekend, and hug your pet this weekend. All right, have a good day, everyone.